This is going to be Sean, actual Justice Warrior, responding to his thing on Tim Pool.
Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers of this channel. My name is Sean, and today I want to talk a little bit about my time in Tim Pool's compound.
I, for one, think that Sean will most likely not be invited back on the podcast, honestly. I don't think he's going to be allowed back on
the culture war, maybe a little bit on Timcast IRL, because the topic of no-fault divorce came up during our conversation about the recent controversies in the conservative media involving divorce, and I think
I just think that we as a society need to move on from the fact that everything said by major conservative media people, yes, like Crowder, yes, like Tim Pool, they don't believe any of it, in all honesty.
it is important to address this particular situation, these particular talking points, because they're not very good, they're not very intelligent, and they keep getting repeated all over the internet.com, and I don't like that very much, so I'm going to use my 10,000 IQ brain in order to debunk all this nonsense. But before we get into that, I want to thank everybody who signed up over on actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money.
Give me the money. Streamlabs is down below.
Give me the money, okay?
And remind you that on Saturday, April 27th in Austin, Texas, I will be at Mindsfest. Vulcan Gas Company's the name of the theater. Link to tickets, top of the description, promo code AJW for 20% off.
I think she's entitled to nothing during these proceedings. And I think the problem is no-fault divorce. And I think we're not dealing with a traditional at-fault divorce. We're dealing with irreconcilable differences. And I think the real answer should have been that when problems arose, a judge told them both, STFU, you are in a marriage.
This is not what judges do. We've talked about this. This isn't how judges act. It's not how they talk. It's not how they treat clients.
It is a sacred covenant. You will not do X, Y, and Z. The problem I have with
That's true. The problem with no-fault divorce is baby trapping. Yeah, that can happen. People can lie. Shit like that can and does happen. It's just a thing. Sora Yuki subscribing with Prime. Thank you very much.
this is...
Oh, I forgot. We're on Twitch. Well, I didn't forget we're on Twitch, but I forgot what you can do on Twitch, like gifting subs or subscribing with Prime or throwing bits. We are about 1/3 of the way through the month, actually exactly 1/3, and Darla A is on the gifted sub leader with 1 gifted sub, and Zed the Snarky is on the gifted bit leader with 200 gifted bits. I am sure that you guys could blow that out of the water. Yes, just like that, Big Joe. Exactly like that. Thank you. Oh, and it looks like the bits and stuff are working. Nice.
Marriage has become dating. It's dating with like strings attached in the financial world after the fact.
So this
Big Joe, yes, exactly like that. You could add or subtract zeros from it, preferably add, but I think you got the gist of it.
section of the conversation actually went viral independently from
And that's the clip that I saw that I posted on Twitter.
everything else, and it's because Tim took a very hard line and honestly a pretty absurd position on no-fault divorce in general, who should pay for a divorce, and all that, and I decided it's important for us to address it. However, I do want to point out that at the beginning of the clip, it starts with me saying she filed. This is in reference, unfortunately, to one of the topics that has been pushed out into the mainstream media.
I've been waiting to see you online on here so I could do that. Well, thank you, Sora. I very much appreciate it.
Which is Steven Crowder and his divorce proceedings. However, 30 seconds prior to this, which is where they should have cut the clip, I actually give the full context of that, which really goes to show how ridiculous some of the conversations about no-fault divorce and who files and all that actually are.
My point was that he has to pay her for, I believe she initiated the divorce.
She filed, but like, remember, she filed after Crowder had already hired a lawyer and moved out of the house and cut her off financially. So like, technically she initiated the divorce and legal documents.
Now, the reason I bring this up is not to relitigate the Crowder divorce. That is on them to deal with. I have very little interest in anything in anybody's personal life, but it is to kind of buttress the point that the idea that we would measure at the point of filing and determine who's at fault just from that is kind of absurd in every possible way. You are ready to get divorced when you hire a divorce attorney, move out of the house, buy a separate home, and have your assistant cut that person off financially. On top of that, even though this particular case was filed as—
Ooh, potato salad sounds good. I have a Jimmy John's sandwich here that I am patiently waiting.
As a no-fault divorce, it could have very easily been filed as a fault divorce. First of all, if you cut somebody off financially, back to the Old Testament, that is grounds for a divorce. You're supposed to support and take care of your wife. Where are you traditional religious people that don't understand that all of a sudden?
That's true, and there's a lot of religious yammering going on around this issue, talking about how no fault is used against Christian conservative men, blah, blah, blah. Tim Pool especially is saying this ridiculous shit about anti-birth control, divorces against the Bible. Insanity.
Now, there's different translations depending on which one you want to go with. I'll link this page right here so you can pick and choose, like everybody does with religion. And
he's not wrong there.
And basically it says, if the man who bought her marries another woman, he must not keep his first wife from having food or clothing or sexual relations. If he does not give her these 3 things, she may go free and she owes him no money. Now look, I don't want to get into this any further, but if you're familiar with this case, there are other claims that could have easily been made in this particular instance of fault that were not made, and they were likely not made in order to protect the reputation of the person who happens to be a public figure and whose income depends on being a public figure. So let us just put that aside for now and point out that some no-fault divorces are actually fault divorces that are filed as no fault for ease, so that you don't have to have a particularly nasty process. Secondly, the solution to getting rid of no-fault divorce and what should happen, as proposed by Tim, is absurd in every possible way.
Stephen has money, therefore they think he should pay. So there's an interesting phenomenon here that for some reason has emerged in this particular case, where you're seeing a lot of these traditional conservatives actually come out as full-on feminist as soon as it comes to the issue of divorce.
No, channel points do not affect Hype Train. It has to actually be subs or bits or something like that. I highly encourage the subs, though, because I think that has a stronger effect. And you guys are really going to let Darla A sit up top with one gift?
I don't think it's feminist at all. If you want,
But it literally
if you
is.
want to incentivize traditional marriage, like you can't like put one party in a position where they get totally like ripped off in case of a divorce.
You're correct, and the
Like,
response is to not allow
the
divorce.
feminist response is to say that all these women need to like store away money in case of a divorce.
No, it isn't.
Like in order to pay for it. Like
the traditional response to how you fix marriage is divorce is not allowed.
okay, but
There's
there are
rare circumstances
Call to Curl is gifted 2 subs to Diavolo and Mr. Blue Sky. And look at that. Right on top. Bang. Call to Curl with 2.
where like a guy is threatening to murder and beating his wife and his kids, and infidelity is one of these things. These are people who I don't think those accusations are on the table. They're mostly just angry with each other and yelling at each other, and they're not getting along. That's where a judge comes in and says, you are grown adults. You will behave appropriately. You have children. Those children need functioning parents. You will treat this relationship properly, get therapy. And at the very least, if you don't like being around each other, you will be professional. And you chose this covenant. We now as a society, this is why it is absolutely a feminist position to say we should allow for divorce over irreconcilable differences.
but like what do you have?
This whole argument is ridiculous. But what if someone's not abusive? What if they're not cheating? What if they become an alcoholic or a drug addict? What if they start just absconding from their parental duties? What if they start financially abusing or emotionally abusing? Stuff like that. This is the most ridiculous statement I've ever heard.
Advocating for them to like live in the same house when they don't like each other? Like
Yes.
that's crazy.
I think that
It is
that
significant.
don't get married.
Oh. It is significantly worse for a child to grow up in a household where the parents are arguing all the time, where they clearly don't like each other, where they hate each other. They're being bad parents or taking it out on each other. They're taking it out on the kids. I feel like it is significantly worse to grow up in that environment than every other week with the parents.
don't get married. This is what I'm saying. You don't have to get married. Nobody made them do it. They said, let's get married. And then 10 years later, they're like, I'm not having fun. I quit.
So in your like theory of like how this should work, like, so you should be able to theoretically, using an example very like not related to this at all. Like, you know, let's say you're a media personality and you move out, buy a townhouse, and then you cut your wife off financially. Like, you should be able to do that. There should be no court redress for that. Because that's what happened in this case. So no, as long as you don't get divorced, though.
No, the judge will say, stop, you are married, STFU, you will both be in this house, you will raise your...
I don't think Tim Pool has ever actually been in a court case like this, honestly.
Kids, you will stop fighting and you will get there.
He's just got no life experience. Tim has no life experience on any of this stuff. He doesn't understand what it's like. Like, me and my ex were very toxic to each other. It is what it is. She left with the kids. If we were married, would I have been able to file for divorce, or would I just have to be like, oh, well, I guess you're just not taking care of your kids then? I guess we're just going to have to live together while you don't take care of your children. Like, what am I supposed to do?
If you don't want to get married, don't get married.
You just said that you don't trust judges in the way that they handle people with money versus no money, and now you're like, the
totally
judge needs to assess whether or not you should live in the same house?
That's completely irrelevant to the point that I'm making.
So if you watch this whole Culture War episode, one of the things that Tim asserted earlier on, and I referenced right there, is that he does not trust judges in order to admonish certain parties for bad behavior during legal proceedings, but in this particular instance, he trusts judges in order to force people to live together in the same household and not allow them to get divorced. This is
he's really picking and choosing what aspects he wants and what he doesn't.
Obviously an impractical reality. It's ridiculous and absurd. And again, while I don't want to keep rehashing the particular notable case that we were discussing, I do want to point out that lots of states have separation periods, lots of states have counseling periods, and counseling and a separation period were in fact present in this particular case. So there were attempts to reconcile this particular situation that we're referring to. Often there are attempts to reconcile those situations. However, irreconcilable differences tend to be irreconcilable, and normally a normal sane person wouldn't think you have to force these people into the same household under judge's orders and tell them to be nice to each other. Like, that's a practical solution. No, absolutely.
None of it's practical. I want to hear that one more time just so I understand for sure what he's saying.
Attempts to reconcile those situations. However, irreconcilable differences tend to be irreconcilable, and normally a normal sane person wouldn't think you have to force these people into the same household under judge's orders and tell them to be...
That sounds very... That sounds very unconstitutional, and it sounds dangerous. Like, that to me sounds like you want domestic discord.
Be nice to each other, like that's a practical solution. No, absolutely not. Now, Tim ends up saying infidelity and abuse and those kind of situations are the reasons why we should have divorce, but in my opinion, this is an absurd position to take, and it never should have.
His whole position is absurd. His whole position is Crowder didn't do anything wrong. Everybody's just a meanie poopy head to him.
Gotten to that point. Now, a lot of people will say, but Sean, after no-fault divorce was codified into law by the evil Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, divorce rates shot up dramatically. Now, it's very important to note for everybody out there in the audience that even though people typically blame Reagan, and the implication is President Reagan, for no-fault divorce, and this spike in divorce that occurred in the 1980s, that President Reagan actually had nothing to do with no-fault divorce. Marriage laws are most often implemented at the state level, and it was in fact Governor Reagan in 1969 who signed the first state's law in terms of no-fault divorce. Now, if you want to blame this wave of no-fault divorce for the increase in divorce rate that people tend to be concerned about, I just want to point out that it didn't...
And that take, that take on its own, the judges should be forcing these people to stay together. They should be forcing these people to live in the house together, blah, blah, blah. That is so insanely authoritarian. I really don't know how to respond to it because it's just an insane take I wouldn't expect real people to have.
Take until 2010 for this to be codified in all 50 states. So it was a long process. You had a sudden jump back in the day in the 1970s, but the last state, again, that codified no-fault divorce was in 2010. And guess which state it was? New York. New York State didn't have no-fault divorce until 2010. So you're going to make the argument that marriage was the most sacred in the state of New York and that the divorce rates, which increased all.
Well, that seems to be the argument a lot of people would be making, is that it is the most sacred in New York because they just codified it a few years ago. I don't feel like making divorce easier is going to make relationships better. I think people just get bored. It's not anything more than that.
Also in the state of New York are due to no-fault divorce when they had that in 2010, not in 1969, not in the 1980s. Now look, I can easily break down the numbers and tell you that states that didn't have no-fault divorce tended to have about 30% more instances of domestic violence reported, which by the way could be because you have to allege something like that in order to get out of a divorce, and in reality actually had 10% more intermarriage homicides because that was seen as a way to get out of it and how that created those corrupt incentives. But I think the point is kind of clear when you realize that New York was the last holdout for no-fault divorce, and it's not like New York had the most sacred of sacred marriages. This is not being portrayed accurately by people in the media. It's just a fact. And it is, in fact, true that divorces did become more common in the 1980s. However, I do want to point out for everybody out there in the audience that that could be due in large part to the way that we measure divorce statistics. You see, not a lot of people are aware of this, but the way that we get a divorce rate in the United States of America is by dividing the total amount of divorce filings from the total amount of marriage licenses issued. Now, for some people out there in the audience,
What the fuck? Really?
you might think this is a good metric of divorce if you never thought about it for more than a split second, but
That is a horrible metric. What does he mean? What do these people mean?
as Thomas Sowell has pointed out, and many other people have pointed out, this is significantly a flawed statistic, especially when you consider the fact that we had all these baby boomers that were born post-World War II, age up into marriage age, get married, have fewer children than their parents had, and then they all started filing for divorce at in and around the same time because statistically marriages will fall apart in and around the same age range. So when you think about the fact that we just have less people potentially to even get married up against more people potentially to even be able to file for divorce, it is likely
So by that, divorce rates are likely going down.
that 50% number that you've often seen quoted throughout your life is not really true. And in fact, conservative thinkers used to point this out. They used to highlight this because they believed that the reason they were using this manipulated statistic in order to talk about the divorce rate was to undercut the premise of marriage. Yet we have people on the right that are pro-marriage quoting this completely uncritically, despite the fact that the way it's measured doesn't actually measure the divorce rate. Again, if you have 10 times as many people that are already married against a much slimmer population, then you're just going to get a distorted statistic on the percentage of people that are being divorced. What you would need to do is track a group of married couples that are representative of the population over time, see when they file for divorce, and use that as your metric. And I believe if you were to do that, you would actually see the divorce rates plummet in comparison to what you're.
I would agree with that too. First off, I want to know how this dude's so smart. Second off, why would that be the divorce statistic? This is just insane to me. But this is what people who dislike no-fault divorce are quoting.
Often be
Stay in an unhappy marriage. Be a man. Could we get a Be a Man donation out there, please? I can't remember the last time we've seen one.
being told. Now, the second thing that I want to address, which is something that I referenced earlier in the video with the fact that you could have filed an easy fault divorce in that particular media personality's case, is this idea, and this is repeated throughout the internet uncritically, that 80% of divorces are initiated by women. Now, we already talked about how the stat of who files first is not really all that meaningful, but guess what? That 80% number, total nonsense. Totally ridiculous. A basic statistical error that was put forward from an outlier study is what people are using in order to make that case. So there was a particular study that showed that 90% of college educated women who are married and thus getting divorced agree to the breakup. They want to break up. Now, this includes mutual situations or situations where the
No, Sean, this isn't what's happening. It's just Steven Crowder being railroaded for money, clearly.
woman initiates. And again, for the 90% of college educated women, it's not 90% of them file for divorce. They just agreed to the breakup. They wanted to break up. These could be mutual situations. In fact, we have percentage breakdown.
And are we seeing, okay, maybe he's about to say it, hold on.
Of how many of them are mutual.
Okay, but maybe it's like, okay, well, my husband or wife was abusive. Maybe it's, well, they turned into an addict. They've abandoned me and the children. Stuff like that.
Mutual situations, because this study doesn't measure who initiated the divorce. It measures which side, including both sides or one side, wants to end the relationship, wants to break up. Then in that same study, it said overall women, not who filed for divorce, by the way, but actually wanted the breakup, is 69%. This also includes instances where the husband also wanted the breakup. Again, it's the blue chart right over there. For some ungodly reason,
I feel these statistics are very, very skewed, it seems like. I'm going to grab a drink of water real quick. Hold on.
even
I'm just going to leave you here in silence for just 30 seconds. Hold on, please. Oh, wrong button.
No, that 69% includes the 90% in this particular survey that were college educated. People decided to split the difference between about 70% and about 90%. By the way, no indication at all whatsoever that there were equal participants. In fact, the exact opposite of the case of college educated women and non-college educated women. And the difference turned out to be around 80%. That's what people are quoting all over social media. That is the number that often gets referenced. A study that, by the way, was an outlier in the fact that it showed that 69% of divorces total were initiated by women, that people took out the subcategory within that 69%, which was 90% for college educated women, according to that particular survey, and then they split the difference and gave you 80%. Every single person that quotes that on the internet, every single one of them that repeats that is lazy, is ignorant, is consumed by confirmation bias, because when I hear a number that sounds kind of big and kind of absurd and think maybe it doesn't make sense, I double check it, and none of them did. I hear...
Yeah. First off, I've probably repeated that. Second off, kudos.
That number all the time on the internet. It's totally made up. In fact, the number that we find consistently throughout the research over and over again is that women do file for divorce, as in initiate the paperwork first more. However, it's in and around the 60s in terms of the percentage, and it usually skews lower towards 60%, not higher towards 70%. And this is true not only in the United States of America, but it's also true in the United Kingdom. So we have one outlier study where the 69% number is actually kind of high, that people have wildly misinterpreted and ended up splitting the difference to generate 80%. And all of these incurious, confirmation bias, absolute morons and goofs have been repeating it to you for years, despite the fact that this information is readily available to the public. Anybody can look it up. All you have to do is wonder, which particular study are these people referring to, and think to yourself, that sounds kind of high. 80% sounds kind of ridiculous.
The reason you got so much pushback is because, like, the practical reality is,
Well, the thing is if the studies and statistics look good, most people aren't going to really go past that in order to disprove their own narrative. If I want to make a point and I find a thing that confirms it, and if I look into it too far, it turns out actually it's not what I think it is, I'm not going to go, okay, well, I better tell the truth. Well, I would, but a lot of these people would not.
is that a lot of people on the right are pushing for a more traditional, like, stay-at-home, like, kind of marriage situation. Now I'm getting married, but my fiance is gonna make pretty good money. Like, she's currently working on her career and all that. But like, you know, I would expect if I got her to stay at home, if like we were to get divorced, that I wouldn't be able to drown her in legal costs in, like, you know, half your states or whatever.
But what if you were poor?
Well, if first of all, if you're poor,
If you were poor.
yeah, same thing. If I didn't have the money to cover it,
She should
and
have to
like
pay for it.
we're married, yeah, from our joint
From the
estate, yeah.
Yeah. My problem is no fault divorce.
Tim just didn't know what to say, but he knew he had to say something that would stick up for Crowder. And honestly, kudos for the effort. You look like a jack off, but kudos to the effort. But the thing is it doesn't matter if you're poor or not. If you first off, we need to shake the shibboleth loose that a one income household for your average non-filthy rich person can work. That we need to let that go, because that's not the case. It doesn't work, and it's never going to work anymore until we have a radically different economy. It doesn't matter. Not going to work. So you cannot have a stay-at-home broodmare wife. Bitch is going to have to work. And second off, why would we want that for women? Why would we want to sit here and say, okay, well, I'm going to make a woman quit her job, have no income, rely on me only. I am going to be financially abusive to her. And when we get divorced, she needs to take care of the kids without getting a dollar from me. Like, no.
It's not that Crowder has to pay. It's that it's no fault divorce. Like getting divorced for we're fighting a lot.
But I'm
like,
saying this is why you were getting pushback. It's like the misstatement of the $25K, which to be fair, that was put out intentionally, I believe, by Louder Crowder to make it seem like it's greedy Hillary. That was their narrative. And then it's the idea that, like, yeah, the traditional housewife gets totally screwed under your scenario.
Now, the other thing that I want to address and close with in terms of this divorce argument, because we have so much information that is completely wrong about it being repeated over and over again, is this idea of entitlement to the marital estate if you are not the person contributing financially.
And let's not forget, Hillary Crowder's family was very wealthy before they started dating. She gave up her career to support Crowder's, and she never took a salary from Louder with Crowder while she did a bunch of work for the show. So she is entitled to not only everything that accrued during the marriage, but child support and probably back wages and whatever money her and her family put into building Louder with Crowder.
To said estate. Now, in most circumstances, when I put out that situation in your mind, people think of the woman in that situation as the person who is the stay-at-home wife and should not be entitled to half of the estate of her husband. And to be perfectly clear, I actually think that there is definitely a limit on where she should be entitled to that estate. When I look at Mackenzie Bezos being essentially the richest woman in the world because she was married to Jeff Bezos, I don't think that makes sense. I think we can all understand there's upward limits for these stay-at-home wives, but that being said, the idea that you're entitled to absolutely nothing, especially if you give up your career and you do these home duties, is ridiculous and absurd in every possible way. First and foremost, men earn more money, it's just factual, when they get married. Women earn more money when they're single, but men actually become better people when they're married. That's one of the reasons why I support marriage. Secondly, you have a bunch of different situations, and I will reference the notable media figure situation and my own personal situation, where you have a startup investment situation.
Because you're not subscribed, that's why you get ads.
From the partner that is not earning the money, and in reality, if this was an investment in the traditional sense, they would be entitled to some of the assets of that. So in the Crowder situation, which again I'm trying to touch on as minimally as possible, Hillary made more money than Steven. She ended up, at his request, leaving her job in order to be the stay-at-home wife, but to be clear, she is listed as a co-founder of Louder with Crowder, the company, the business.
Co-founder, God knows how much money he put into it, or she put into it, and never took a salary.
that would eventually grow into the successful behemoth that it actually is. Now, you could make the case that it could have been any person or whatever that substituted for her. That is on you, but I'm going to go to my own personal situation so you can understand why I'm not really interested in that argument. So, way back in the day when I had absolutely no money and I actually got a job after college and I ended up not being paid by said job, so I was going into debt, my fiance, who did not believe that I was going to be successful on YouTube, thought it was a crazy idea, thought it was ridiculous because, you know, nobody she knew was ever in the YouTube business, decided, even though she probably didn't think it was a great idea for me to pursue that option, to buy me a camera and an editing laptop. I always talk about this on this channel, a 2011 MacBook Pro, the very oldest computer that you could possibly have that runs the editing software that I was trained on, which is Final Cut Pro. And that allowed me to build up all of this. That allowed me to build this entire channel. The fact that she believed enough, or at least believed in me enough, even if she didn't believe in the idea, to contribute to that when she had no money either. And that's the reason I'm sitting in front of you right now. And my industry is very much timing based. The fact is, if I would have started a little bit later, it would have been significantly harder. Who knows if I would have given up? Who knows if I would have ever started, because I was in such crippling debt before I got this equipment and I had no excuses but to put in the work. So if you ask me whether or not my fiance is entitled to the estate that is created by this particular channel, I'd say 100%. And she only put in, we're talking maybe a $500 investment total, and she doesn't do work behind the scenes like somebody else's wife did for the company in order to make this functioning. But that initial investment is what leads me to be right here. Now, look, you could say I'm the smart one, I'm the one who produces the content that you like and all that, but the fact of the matter is, a lot of this industry is based on timing, and her helping me at that moment, at that time, even though it probably cost her something like $500 to $600 total way back when, is what allows me to be right here today. And by the way, I'm in a great situation where it happens to be a two-way street. My fiance is currently in law school. Now, she's smart, so she has a scholarship that covers the majority of her tuition. She also works full-time, so she can pay for the other portions of her tuition. But the fact of the matter is, my support definitely helps her, and considering we're going to get married before she graduates, and at that point in time, haven't told her about this, I'm going to be covering the expenses that she incurs. I'm going to retire her previous student loan debt, which, by the way, she was very smart to pay off the overwhelming majority of it, and I really appreciate that, because we work as a team, and when she becomes a successful lawyer, because we're building our lives together.
I think this is part of the thing we forget, too, in relationships, is that it is teamwork. It's a partnership. You work together. You don't just take what you can and tell people to go fuck themselves.
That will also be the estate that is joint between the two of us, that we will be able to split. Look, I really do believe in marriage. I really do believe that you can build a life with somebody. I really do believe in complementary, interlocking gender roles for couples. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of this dialogue, a lot of this skirting of responsibility from one party or the other party just sounds absurd on its face. And the idea that you're going to join everything except for your estate, that's not what a marriage is. That sounds like a secular, leftist, progressive position, and I'm not interested in that. Now, while we can talk about maybe separation periods like they have in the state of North Carolina or in other states in this union, the fact of the matter is, a lot of the dialogue around no-fault divorce is stupid as well, because if you create a system where people are incentivized, if they want to split apart, to file claims of abuse, file claims of all kinds of different improprieties, all you're going to have is more men being victims of said claims, having their reputations destroyed, because in a lot of states in this union, divorce filings are public. So I would rather have clean breaks for marriages that are definitely not going to work. I believe that you should fight for your marriage, but in reality and actuality, there are limits to what the government can do in these situations, and I don't think we should base policy on our
right-wing authoritarianism and left-wing authoritarianism really is no different. You want the government to come in and put forward your beliefs over other people's. That's it. Your belief should be enforced by the government. Other people's beliefs should be banned by the government. That's literally all it is.
Vision or perception on what a no-fault divorce is, rather than the reality and the potential unintended consequences of getting rid of this potential option. Now look, I will link the full context of my appearance in the description of this video and my other appearance on IRL for you guys to check out, but as usual, if you like this video, then show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content, you can follow me on all my social medias, you can support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about a bit of an absurd point in the conversation, if I'm being perfectly honest, with Tim. Till next time.
It was absurd. I'll agree with that much.